We want to switch gears quickly here to our next guest, who is very patiently waiting, and thank him for that. John Ackerman, a professor at the Institute for Legal Research at the National Autonomous University of Mexico, here to talk about with us, about U.S.-Mexico relations. Professor Ackerman, thank you so much for being with us.
How you doing? Pleasure to be on your wonderful show. Congrats for all your work. Many greetings from Mexico City.
Right on. Well, thank you so much. It really is an honor to have you here. And, we've got, Republicans saying they want to bomb Mexico. We've got the State Department saying Mexico is destroying democracy. I mean, what is it about, President AMLO that seems to be working up the U.S. Establishment so much?
Well, I think you guys got to tell me more about it from your on side, because I don't think it's so much about AMLO, but it's more about those Republicans who are a little bit desperate, I think, about the political situation domestically there in the United States, in general, about the crisis of U.S. hegemony in the world. When you start talking about bombing, drug factories, which I don't deny exists, most likely in Mexico, throughout Mexico, also in the United States, you've reached a limit in which institutions, criminal justice, the police are not working. And you just resort to violence and to shaking that stick. I think this is more about global hegemony than it is about actually combating drugs. We have a serious problem in Mexico, of course. You guys have a serious problem in the United States. Actually, what we're talking about here is not so much, drug use in Mexico, but drug use in the United States. How many people, 100,000 people died from fentanyl overdoses last year. It's a serious national health problem, but that needs to be resolved through treatment programs, through treating this as a health problem and not of a excuse to start throwing bombs, right? I mean, this just really is over the edge for us down here in Mexico. I mean, we're used to the United States being imperialistic, authoritarian, and trying to impose its will on the U.S. But historically, Mexico has been very much free of, direct U.S. intervention. It's not like Colombia. No, so in Colombia there are a dozen U.S. bases there. In Mexico, there are no U.S. bases. This is a long heritage, the defense of Mexican sovereignty since the Mexican Revolution of 100 years ago. And so the Mexican president has responded correctly, saying that this is just going overboard. Of course, we need to work together to control the drug trade. We need to take care of our people. But somehow to imagine this is going to be resolved through throwing bombs and through the United States imposing this on Mexico is just kind of silly, right? It'd be like, the Mexican government saying we're going to go bomb those gun fairs, right? in Arizona and New Mexico, which are, we're also losing about 100,000 people a year, but not through drug overdoses, but through, gun violence, which is coming down through these, semi-automatic weapons coming from the United States. So we could say the same, you guys are killing our Mexicans. We're going to bomb you, but, we got to work together. We share a continent, we share a whole region. I think this is more about politics than anything else.
Well, I'm glad you raised that. The issue here isn't actually about drug cartels or drugs or any of that. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that these kinds of comments come after this massive rally where President Lopez Obrador spoke, marking, this 85 years since oil resources were expropriated from foreign corporations, and then insisting, we're never going to be a colony or protector of the U.S. And then also this comes after AMLO has started to nationalize the country's lithium reserves, which I can't imagine the U.S. is very happy about. Obviously, lithium is a very sought after mineral, especially, with the building of more and more electric vehicles and other things, which a lot of electronics need lithium. So all that's to say, I mean, there's also been this kind of tsunami of news articles I've noticed from the corporate press in the U.S., increasingly referring to AMLO as authoritarian and really trying to highlight that he's just this really awful, bad president very suddenly. So I'm just curious, do you think this has more to do with a fear of Mexico having a president that is insisting on Mexican sovereignty, that isn't so controllable by the United States like perhaps past presidents were, as there's another election coming up and so on?
Absolutely. So our previous president, Enrique Peña Nieto, I was just watching the last segment before I came on about political prisoners in the United States. We had in Mexico, in the last sexenio, the periods are 6 years long, so they're called sexenios, hundreds of new political prisoners were thrown to jail because they were protesting against neoliberalism, against government authoritarianism. Lots of repression. And at that point, the United States press or political class said little or nothing about what was going on because Peña Nieto was absolutely pro-American, pro-neoliberal. He orchestrated the whole attack on Venezuela through the Grupo de Montevideo, de Lima. Very much of a sort of the attack dog for the United States in Latin America. And now López Obrador has come in and sort of put that all on its head. We've had a very much of an independent international policy, literally saved the life of Evo Morales in the context of the coup d'etat a few years ago, and has been recuperating this idea of Latin American unity and the defense of sovereignty. Like you said, this recent march, not only the march, but in general, the policies of this government have been defending this legacy of national sovereignty, which comes from the Mexican Revolution. Not everyone knows about this, but our constitution in Mexico is absolutely progressive. We have a right to land, to work, to education, to healthcare. All natural resources underneath the surface of the land are they don't belong to the government; they belong to the nation, right? So it's not like in Texas where you can, drive or anywhere in the United States. You put your hole into the ground, and you get those cartoons, right? That's my own little oil spurt for my wealth. In Mexico, that's just not the case. Everything underneath the surface belongs to the nation, to the collectivity. And so, yes, of course, this irritates the Washington establishment and creates these kinds of tendencies and temptations to attack AMLO, because, like you said, it's not just this case. There was the same day, about 3 weeks ago, there was a front page article in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and also I think in the Economist or the Financial Times, one of the British press, about this other march supposedly defending the autonomy of the electoral institutions, when actually what's happening is the opposite. These electoral institutions have been co-opted by the neoliberal oligarchs and are being used to attack this democratic elected presidency, and he's trying to create a more democratic process to get the electoral constitution elected. We're in the middle of that process right now, and so don't believe the corporate press. Wonderful that you guys are here getting the word out about what's actually happening on the ground. And we're in a real struggle for democracy. Because to remember, Mexico was under the control of a party state, a single party, for about 70 years. And then we transitioned to democracy supposedly in the year 2000, but it was a right-wing transition to a neoliberal democracy, which was in for 18 years. And López Obrador, the present president, quote-unquote, lost 2 previous elections, which were pretty fraudulent. So the 2018 elections were really a kind of a moment of sea change in history for Mexico, and we're trying to struggle to change things on the ground. And lots of interests in the United States are interested in derailing that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was actually hoping you could talk a little bit more about this electoral reform, which is, seems to be widely popular. And, I was there in the election in 2018, and everyone I met, at least working class folks, were telling me that was the thing they were worried about. They're like, oh, we think AMLO's going to win, but the system, we have no idea. So it seems like it would make sense you would have a reform, but the way it's been presented in the American media especially is this is somehow, anti-democratic.
Yes, this is the case. So we have a formally autonomous electoral institute. We actually, on the books, the electoral law is fantastic. It's something I've personally worked on for a long time, much superior to what you have in the United States, right? So in the United States, you have all these local legislations. Every municipality votes in a different way. Some of these weird butterfly ballots. You remember those? Or these machines, and you don't have an electoral court. The Supreme Court has to decide in the end. It's kind of prehistorical, the way in which the United States organizes its elections, electoral college, etc. In Mexico, we have very modern, recent reforms which have created this national autonomous electoral institute. This is the product of civil society mobilization or the demand for democracy, particularly during the 80s and the 90s. And in the beginning, it was a great idea, and it's still a good idea. The problem is that precisely because it was so powerful, this autonomous institution, it was a big temptation to get captured by these neoliberal powers that be that were in government up until 2018. So they basically filled this autonomous institute with their representatives of corporate interests and other political groups. And now that we have a left-wing government in power, they are trying to use this autonomy against the elected government. You have to understand also that not only is the institutional structures very positive, but also the question of, for instance, campaign funding, right? So in the United States, you guys basically have no limits on private funding donations, and in Mexico, we have very strict limits. Only 10% of the funding for any campaign can come from private interest. 90% has to come from public funding, very generous public funding as well. And so it really matters how that money is distributed, how it's organized. And we have an autonomous electoral institute, which is trying to subvert the left, right? Then we have a problem. And of course, they paint this as an attack on their autonomy, on liberal democracy institutions. But actually, when you look under the surface of the power that's actually being moving around there, you see this is actually part of the struggle for democracy. Now, I personally don't agree with every element of this electoral reform. There are some problems with it. I think there is some things that should have been talked about, in more detail in the Congress. But in general, it's nothing like how it's being presented in the international media. And these big marches are very much funded by the oligarchs. I mean, Mexico is a very unequal country. It's one of the most unequal countries in the world. We have had lots of development in the last decades. We're one of the 50th country, the largest country in the world in terms of GDP. But there's also incredible amounts of inequality, like Carlos Slim. These guys are, hanging out with Bill Gates and all the other oligarchs in the world, and so they're not particularly happy with the political change that's happening in Mexico. It's not just the United States; it's also these powers in Mexico which are trying to subvert democracy.
Mm-hmm. Well, Professor John Ackerman, really appreciate you being willing to join us to help us sort through all of this, and we'll keep watching it, but appreciate you giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you. And next year, 2024, is our big presidential election in Mexico, so please keep your eye on, just south of the border. Don't forget about Mexico. It's a very important country.
Yes, it is. We'll be covering it more this year and next.
Please, I'm very happy to be on with you. And there are a lot of the people I'm sure who would love to talk to you from Mexico. We got to unite forces. North America, we cannot give it up to neoliberal capitalism. We have a lot in the base and the social movements that if we unite, we can do a whole lot. So thank you very much for your time and your attention.
No, thank you. It was a pleasure.